Okay, so today I am going to paint from photo reference. This is a fish that we saw at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And I painted this fish before, but I used a little bit different palette. And I really like the photograph. It's got a nice sort of nice set of lights and darks. I'm going to start out with a pretty basic fishy shape here. I don't know what kind of fish this is. I could do maybe a little research and figure it out. But, you know, I just like the shapes. And it's okay to paint stuff. If you just like the shapes and you want to give it a try, by all means, paint it. That's what I always do. I just paint whatever I want. I'm just trying to paint something that, I don't know, makes me happy, I guess. But this is a super Bob Ross thing to say, wasn't it? But, you know, that's what it boils down to. I don't have to have really any other reason. I went through that in art school, trying to be important, trying to do things that, you know, made my teachers happy. And, you know, they were good teachers, don't get me wrong. But, you know, sometimes you just gotta paint what you gotta paint. And anything can really strike your fancy. And this is gouache. I am not gonna focus on really anything in particular on this. As far as the video is concerned, and I'm just going to try and explain to you what's going on. I'll try and keep it relatively brief because I don't want to bore people. I might speed up the drawing process here. It's not going super fast here. I'm just trying to, you know, get the relative shapes and stuff in place the way I want them. Something like this. I'm going to try not to look at my other painting, which I was pretty happy with, but that's always the challenge when you paint something again. If you liked it the first time, and then the challenge is always to get the next one to you know, to delight you in the same way that the first one delighted you. And I don't know, I just want the main shapes, and I think that's adequate. I'm using 300-pound Arches cold press. It's small. It's a small painting. I want to be able to move pretty fast through this so I can give you guys an idea of the process. It's white paper, so I'm just going to put a yellow ochre wash on here. So just so I'm not working on white. If some of this yellow ochre happens to sort of peek through the nooks and crannies of my subsequent layers, all the better. It'll kind of warm it up. But I think this is going to be a pretty cool painting. And the yellow ochre is just sort of a, you know, probably none of this is going to show up. But it's going to make it a little easier to work on than working on a stark white background. Especially because this heavy cold press paper has quite a bit of texture. I am working on the back side, so it has less texture than the front has. But it's still a lot. So 1/2 inch flat, and let's see what we can get done. So my palette, instead of using, so here's where the big difference is between this and the last one. This is Prussian blue, as you can see, super dark, very saturated. I'm using Prussian blue. I'm going to use burnt sienna, and I'm going to use yellow ochre, and I'm going to try and make that be just it. Okay. You know, obviously I have to use some white too, but so nice dark color mixed up with Prussian blue and burnt sienna, going at it pretty washy, meaning when I say washy, what I mean is lots of water. And then later on, I will use more full-bodied paint. Just want to get these big shapes. If I paint in some things that are light with dark, that's okay. I can go over it again with a lighter color. I just want to make sure that I get my darks sort of established. And you can see it is very washy, and as the brush sort of runs out of paint, I just let it. So that's that. Okay, I'm going to try and leave this as is. let's take maybe some pure Prussian blue and maybe just block in a little bit of background. Oh my God, that is dark. I'm gonna have to make that quite a bit washier. This may have been a mistake to go so dark, but you know what? It's gouache. I will make my subsequent layers. I will add more white and I will go over this. So sticking with the 1/2 inch flat, everyone's wondering why on earth did he paint yellow ochre? It's all going to be covered. Well, I don't know. Part of the process, part of the curve here. It gives you something to react to, something to, you know, it's a foil upon which I can ply my trade here. That's a little better. So, you know, there's two ways to lighten up a color. You can either add white to it or you can just add water to it and make it more transparent. If you have a light background, more of the light from the background is going to show through. So I went from that super dark in here and then I just sort of spread that pigment around in the wash. My paper's buckling a little bit. Paper's slightly wet. Totally okay. I'm starting to get a fish shape here. On my reference, what I noticed, one of the things that attracted me to this reference, which I took, so... you know, the fish is darker than the background on the bottom, and the fish is lighter than the background on the top. That's always kind of fun when you have different rates of contrast going on. So I can lighten and darken things as I go. So let's see. I'm just going to paint for a while, and I might speed this up because I'm going to stop talking, and then we'll just go from there. Get a little highlight on there. I realize I need some more darks in here. Let's see. It's hard to talk when you're trying to figure it out, when you're making it up as you go along. So I'm going to try and establish some more of these dark shadows around the gills, the eye. And the nice thing about gouache is you can kind of use it to cut in around your shape. I read somewhere once that we have 2 chances to get the shape right. When we initially draw it, and then again when we add the background in, because you can always sort of cut into it. And again, I'm a fan of sort of modeled backgrounds. I don't need to have everything be perfectly smooth here. Let's keep this pretty light on top. As long as my fish is lighter, I think I'll be a happy camper. Just enough water to get the paint to flow off of the brush. And let's darken that up a little bit more on top. There we go. Might have to move the eyeball around a little bit. That's all right. Everything is changeable with gouache. No mistake. Well, there's a couple things that are kind of hard to back out of, but I'm not really out there. One of the hardest things to back out of is if I get a big water puddle in the middle of an area of fairly thick paint. That can be a little bit difficult to find your way home from. But when you know, if you get your paint consistency right, you know, I could probably put 5 or 6 or 7 layers of paint on here and make corrections each time. So, not too concerned. And I might change brushes. A 1/2 inch flat for the whole thing seems a little extreme. Yeah, let's change brushes to a slightly smaller flat. I might move back to the 1/2 inch in a minute, but we'll see. Let's get, I think his tail is, ooh, we need a lot more water there, don't we? Kind of a dirtier color, get some more burnt sienna. Oh my God, see, look at that. Prussian blue is just on steroids. My God. Trying to get more of a sort of a grayed out tone here, but the Prussian blue is really taken over. There we go. That's a little more what I want. It's kind of a more grayed out color with a little bit of a blue sort of cast to it. And I can keep this fairly wet here. A little lighter, a little darker down here. Just block it in, just looking for patterns of light and dark right now. And that's, you know, that's just kind of what's fun for me. Just figuring out what areas are lighter, what areas are darker than my background. This needs to be a lot darker. And you can just layer it up and build it little by little as your perception sort of dictates. I still have some water in this paint, but it's getting a little drier as I go. A little more body to it, in other words. Let's make that chin a little bit steeper, a little bit more pugnacious attitude in this guy. You can almost paint directly on top of wet paint. It gives you a little bit softer edge. But if you want to let some parts dry, like I'm done with down here, I'm going to let that dry a little bit, or so I say. Let's get a little bit more. There we go. And I'm just going to skip around a little bit. Move up here. While one part's drying, you can be working on the next bit. Liking the looks of that so far. A little more light in front of that gill. Not too much though, just a little bit of reflected light from the bottom, it looks like. Coming up here, still darker, still a little bit darker than the water around it. And maybe starts to sort of fade out here. So you get some pretty soft transitions just by putting in intermediate tones. I'm a big fan of the intermediate tone. That I need to make darker, but I need to let it dry before I do that. So in the meantime, let's mix up some more of this stuff. So I'm going to grab some more Prussian blue, more white, some yellow ochre to kind of make it a little bit greener, a little bit more aqua. The yellow ochre is relatively a weak pigment compared to Prussian blue. I had exactly the right color, but then I added more Prussian blue, and now I got to start all over again. I'm trying to match that, but if I don't match it exactly, I can test it. That's a little darker. Make it a bit lighter, a bit greener, a little wetter here. That's very close. If it's not exact, I'm actually happy for it to not be exact. I want some visual interest. I want some of the background to show through, some of the previous coats of paint, some of my previous colors, mistakes. They're not really mistakes though, they're just layers. I should call them layers, not mistakes. Because if I painted this all exactly the right color the first time through, it would end up looking a little bit flat. Being able to see all my subsequent paint layers, I think is one of the most beautiful things about gouache and painting with lots of layers and really thick, very opaque paint. I can let this, the surface of the water has more light coming through it, so I'm gonna allow this to be a little bit lighter. Maybe some reflections off the surface. Again, I'm not trying to match what I see exactly. at the risk of sounding pompous, you know, it's just sort of it's an impression. We've all heard that before. That's why they're called impressionists. But, you know, I'm just using what I'm looking at, what my reference is, as a place to start, as a place to document my perception. So, you know, am I a realist painter? I don't know. I heard the term perceptual painter, and I really like that, because I'm not necessarily trying to paint this exactly as it is. I'm trying to paint my perception of it. I decided I'm going to move this tail out a little bit more. I need a little bit more space on the back of this fish. So let's see if we can do that, if that's even possible. Can I make this fish a little bit longer? Sure, it's going to come a little bit closer to my border. And this is a tiny painting. Like I said, it's 6 by 4.5 inches. But I think I can spare, you know, a little bit extra, get it closer to this border here. You know, it's moving in this direction. You know, it's moving from right to left. So why not? Let's put it farther to the right so it has some space to sort of move into. If you can hear that spritzing, I am spraying my paint down a little bit. I'm in my studio. It's probably about 90 degrees outside. The sun's going down, but it was a relatively warm day today. And consequently, my paint's drying out pretty fast. So I just want to keep, I get a little spray bottle here. It's a couple bucks at the art supply store. So I, you know, occasionally I just sort of spray things down. So there we go. I moved that tail back a little bit. That looks a little bit better. Just kind of make that these transitions between these colors a little bit less jumpy. I think push a little bit more yellow into this, yellow ochre that is. Let's go that route down here and maybe make it kind of washy. That actually is a little bluer. But I feel like there is sort of some golden color coming in here. Let's see if I can get some of that. It's not quite as golden as the, you know, texture where my, you know, if I had just left the underpainting show through. But there is some yellow, kind of gold rather, showing through. And I think the yellow ochre is actually a pretty decent choice for that. And just a touch of white to it. I don't want to wash it out too much, but I want to get it so it'll cover a little bit. There we go. But not cover entirely. Again, I want to be able to let some of these previous layers kind of show through. A little bit lighter back here by the tail. There we go. Kind of some shiny surface coming right through the center. I think I need to move that tail, this tail fin. I don't know if it's a tail fin. This has got to come back more as well. It's more like there, I think. And so what do we do here? Just paint over the part that we don't care for. Got a little too light there. Darken it up while it's still wet, that's okay. And let's see, let's go a bit lighter and just sort of change this top edge. A little bit of a highlight right along here, very light. And let's just fill in a little bit here. This fin is not quite as dark as I made it, so let's just take a little white and lighten that up. I apologize if I start mixing off camera here. And I use this is my background color, but I've sort of used it on my fish, you know, lightened up substantially. Again, what kind of fish this is, I don't really know. It's in a saltwater tank, so I could check. I guess I should have looked at the label when I was at the aquarium. But I just thought it was kind of cool looking, so I took some pictures of it. And of course, only one of the pictures came out really well. The other ones were didn't quite have the contrast that I wanted. Again, a flat is a great brush because even though I've switched to a slightly smaller brush here, I'm still using the edge, and I'm getting all the shapes that I want to get with it. The corner of a flat is almost just like the tip of a round. I can move the brush sideways and get exactly the kind of, well, not exactly, but I can get a close approximation of the kind of shape that I want. Just blunt nose, kind of chin. And that's starting to read like I want it to. Just kind of want to define the bottom of the eyeball, get a little bit more of the curve and the volume of the face here. At the risk of making it too light like I just did, I can change the shape of that quite easily. And at this point, I'm just sort of pushing lights and darks around. Just kind of going back and forth. It's a little darker underneath the eyeball. Going from big shapes to small shapes and just trying to keep it making sense. I like painting small because I've always liked sketchbooks, an artist's sketchbook, and the working drawings that an artist sort of uses just to sort of inform their practice have always been super interesting to me. And I think as a result, that's all I do is sketchbook sized drawings, or paintings rather. And like I said before, you can paint any way you want. This is just the way I choose to paint. I like small paintings. My attention span, you know, I got kids in the house, and who knows what mischief they're up to, but you know, my wife's in there, and I don't want to be away too long because that's not being a good partner, really. They're tired from their first day of school though. Now everyone's going to be like, "Oh my God, he's getting into all his personal life." But you know, that's what I think about when I paint. Am I out here too long? Does anyone need help? My phone is right here. I can, in case of emergencies, I can be right there. But that's one of the reasons why I like to move pretty quickly through these things. Also because painting fast is fun. It doesn't, I don't want to get bogged down in the decision-making process. I want to go with my first inclination and just sort of stick with that if I can. Because oftentimes that first inclination is pretty good. I find that in my own practice, when I overthink things, is when I sort of run afoul, you know. Things not going so great, thinking too much about what's going on. But if I just go for it and then, you know, worry about sort of going in and fixing things or adjusting things later, it's just a more fun way to paint, and I usually end up with a better result. So I want to go a little darker in here, a little more muted. So the Prussian blue and the burnt sienna make a very viable chromatic black. And now I'm just making some of these scale colors just by letting the brush just sort of lightly hit sort of the nubs of the paper. I got to change the look of some of these highlights. Just grab lighter and darker. Mostly what I'm doing here is it's just sort of value. It's a value study. I think this eye is too far back. What if I try something radical just to show you how easy it is to fix stuff? I want to move that eye forward. So I'm just going to kind of scumble it out and get something darker. Make that shadow come up a little more. And I'm going to leave that alone. Just let it sort of dry out a little bit more. Now this is one blind fish here that I got going on. Okay, I think I don't want to, like I said, my stated goal was to try hard not to bore anyone, and I feel like I might be going too long here, but we will see where we're at. And nice and dark, let's re-establish that eye right up there. This is where I'm gonna have to go with a little brush. I'm gonna grab my little round here, get some very light toned paint kind of from this yellowy area. I know it's still a little wet, but I'm gonna see if I can just sort of block it in. A little ridge on top of the eye. And this is probably not gonna be as light as I need it to be, but let's just get sort of a placeholder in there and this kind of milky sort of pupil in there. I think that's pretty good. And then it's just a matter of sort of adjusting the smaller shapes as you go. So switch back to a flat. Well, maybe not. I still want to adjust that shape. I just want to get it, well, I just want to get it right, for crying out loud. So sometimes these little shapes, that's a little bit closer. They're little, so they're challenging. That is a lot closer to what I wanted to get. And I know it's a super small difference here, but meaningful all the same, I think. Okay, so I spend a lot of time getting things kind of right and getting them sort of dialed in. And then I usually spend an equal amount of time, I don't know, sort of obliterating the painting. You know, making some parts disappear almost. So let's see if I can make it a little more interesting by showing a little less. Just the shape of the fin here. Kind of like how that one just sort of peters out. And again, this is where, you know, I'm maybe moving a little bit away from my reference. Because the reference is actually very clear. But let's just see what happens when I make it a little bit less clear. Overlap some things, reestablish some things, and just sort of check it out and see what happens if I make it a little foggy. Get a little bit more sense of this sort of underwater environment. Maybe tighten up some of these value relationships. I'm gonna be a little careful though, because my paint that I'm painting on, the part of the painting that I am painting on top of is fairly thick paint. So if I go too wet or too soupy, I'm gonna get one of those puddles, which, like I said, that can be quite difficult to back your way out of. All right, this is kind of taking on a little bit of the look that I was envisioning in my head. I think as artists and as art teachers, I feel like my goal as a teacher, you know, when I'm teaching my students, is if I can get them to land a little bit closer to where they're aiming, you know, that's what I want to do. That's satisfying, and that feels good as an artist to have a vision and then do a painting and say, well, that was pretty close to what I was trying to achieve. And it sounds simple, but I think it's important to have a stated goal in mind. And if your stated goal is just to come close to what you're thinking of when you start, that's as worthy a goal as anything, really. And you know, I have a fair amount of experience painting, but I by no means have it all figured out. And I am just looking for a way to get closer to the mark. And gouache is really nice because it affords you so many tries. You get so many tries. I was reading online, someone said, oh, you shouldn't layer more than 5 layers in gouache. And maybe that's true, but I think I've done paintings that have more than 5 layers. And it didn't explode, or, you know, I didn't get hurt doing it. And the painting seemed to hold together just fine. So pay attention to what you're doing. And if it looks like it's so thick that it's maybe going to crack, or maybe you do it and you go, well, it does crack. And then you try and remember how many layers you did and go, well, that might be too much. But there are, like I was saying, there's a lot of forgiveness with gouache. You have lots of opportunities to fix things. I'm just going to soften this edge by making a little bit lower rate of contrast up here on the top. And it doesn't have to be everywhere, but I just want that light edge of the fish to be knocked back a little bit, not quite so strident. And I can do that just by lightening the background. So the rate of contrast is now a little bit lower. Try and feather in some of these sharp transitions a little bit. But that's pretty easy to do. That's a pretty easy thing to do when you're working on cold press, because Like I said, these layers, you can see how they're just sort of hitting the high points of the texture on the paper. And it's leaving these nice, scumbly, sort of interesting to me anyway, textural marks from the dry brush. That's a little too light, but there we go. And I think let's move into even a little bit darker underneath the fish, right down. Oh, that wasn't darker at all, was it? Well, sometimes we have to sneak up on things. There, and I like the idea of this tail just kind of coming out of the darkness a little bit. So I'm going to push a little bit more dark, some more dark water tones back into this lower right-hand corner. And just sort of, like I said, just sort of scumble it in, just sort of, almost a dry, brushy sort of fade in. Just so this fish looks like he's sort of coming out of the shadows here and into the light. And I think this is getting pretty close to where I want to be. I think I can go, this has got to be a little darker under here, under the chin. Just want to change that shape just a little. I could make that chin come out just a little bit more. I've mixed up a color that's almost the same as the background, so I got to sort of sneak up on that and make it a little bit darker. A little bit more like that, and then a little lighter, little reflected light coming up into its belly here. If you're going into wet, you got to go a lot lighter. Yes, something like that. So once again, 3 colors: Prussian blue, burnt sienna, very little bit of burnt sienna, and yellow ochre, and of course white. And I just want to bring a little more light in the top and sort of through the center to get the idea of that sort of shine on those scales. Here's a pitfall. That little shape and that little shape are very, very similar. So I'm going to take some dark paint and just chop those up a little bit so they're not so uniform. And I think this is looking okay, pretty close to where I want to get it. And that's that. I'm going to call it a day on this one. And if you like this little painting, go to my website, craigstevensart.com. It'll be at the end of the video. And it's for sale for, I don't know, $100, $120, something like that. I'll figure it out. If you don't want it, that's fine. But hopefully you enjoyed watching this video, and hopefully it was helpful to you. Let me know if you have any questions at all, or if there's anything that you'd like to see me paint, and I will do my very best to fit it in, unless it's something that I think I'm going to embarrass myself too badly on. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and we're going to call this one good. We'll see you next time.